Thank you so much for joining us at our Advances in Autism Research and Care webinar. I hope you're having a lovely Wednesday morning or afternoon. I'm very excited to welcome Donna Murray from Autism Speaks to welcome our presenter for the day.
Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Alycia Halladay. Alycia is the Chief Science Officer at the Autism Science Foundation, where she oversees their science programs and their research portfolio. She previously served as Senior Director of Environmental and Clinical Services at Autism Speaks. And I also like to add that Alycia hosts a very popular science webinar weekly, the Autism Science Foundation Weekly Podcast. So welcome, Alycia, and thank you for sharing with us today.
Well, thank you, Donna. That was a very, very nice introduction, and it's really my honor to be on this webinar series. This is a very well-known and very well-respected series, and I'm so pleased and honored to be a part of it. So today I wanted to talk about the Autism BrainNet, and many of you have maybe heard of it and not really known what it was, or if you haven't heard of it, wondered why something like this doesn't exist. So I'm just going to go through kind of what it is, why it's important, and what does it have to do with people who are on this phone call. So hold on. Just trying to advance and not having much luck. Page down. There we go. So that's me. That's a picture of me. And as Donna mentioned, I'm the Chief Science Officer at the Autism Science Foundation. If you guys want to take a minute, I know everybody multitasks, and I'm not judging, but everybody multitasks during these things. And while you're multitasking, you can go ahead and sign up for more information about the BrainNet. The signing up for more information does not mean you're going to, do anything right now. It doesn't mean that you're committed to anything, but you will get some nifty kind of science information on a quarterly basis, as well as being included in a number of different educational opportunities if you sign up. So the first question that we get is, what is the Autism BrainNet? And the Autism BrainNet is a collaboration of 4 sites in the United States, and they're called nodes. And there's also one in the UK. So these are actually brain banks. This used to be called, for many of you who remember the old Autism Speaks days, this used to be called the Autism Tissue Program, and it just got kind of rebranded as the Autism BrainNet. The idea is that there needs to be multiple sites involved in banking brains. Now, the brain is the organ of interest in autism, or the primary organ of interest. I know the gastrointestinal tract and even some motor neurons are very interesting, but it's really the primary organ of interest. But yet there's so little resources to be able to study it. And there's been so much that's accumulated because of this. What we know about animal models that has led to different treatments for autism has come from understanding the brains of people with autism. We understand the signs and symptoms of autism. We understand why people with autism are different. We understand what happens now, and I'll go through some of these findings as people age. And these are all questions that, of course, everybody wonders about, and is only able to be answered if you can actually study the brains of people with autism. So it's focused on autism, but it does include idiopathic and syndromic. So disorders like Dup15q and Phelan-McDermid, those are syndromes with a high prevalence of autism, and they are a part of the Autism BrainNet as well. But really, the idea is to understand multiple forms of autism and the genetics behind that. And it's not always so simple as just one particular gene. Unfortunately, there are only about 250 brains collected so far totally, and that includes brains from people with autism and brains of people without autism, because there needs to be that comparison group. And really, the whole reason this BrainNet was formed was because there's an intense need for this. And if individual researchers had to go out and find this precious resource themselves, they could never do it. And in fact, there was a couple of researchers in the US and one in the Netherlands who was doing this, trying to do it on their own, and they just couldn't do it. So this was actually one of the programs of the National Alliance for Autism Research, which is, now has, changed organizationally, but still the goal is to collect them in a common way and then make them available to researchers worldwide. And so here are the different nodes here in the United States. They're spread out. There's one in Boston led by Matt Anderson, one in Mount Sinai here in New York led by Patrick Hoff, one at University of Texas Southwest Medical Center led by Carol Tominga, and one led by Cindy Schumann at UC Davis. And the idea is that you know, stronger together, right? Before, in previous iterations of this program, there had been one brain bank, and now there are 4. And so that has definitely increased the amount of outreach and the amount of communication and the amount of presence that this program has been able to have around the country. It's definitely been a good thing. So the nodes, which are these brain banks themselves, you can see, you know, there's a 1-877 hotline. They take calls in case there is a donation. Those calls, there's one number, but those calls will be immediately routed to a particular brain bank. They facilitate the donation. They work with the family. They work with the medical examiner. They work with whoever. They do meet with the donor family. They verify an autism diagnosis. You can see here they process the tissue and they store it, and then they'll also distribute it to different researchers, and they keep track of it. So there's a lot that these different nodes do, and they do all of these things the same way. So, so everything is done the same way at UT Southwestern that it's done at UC Davis. But that's what the nodes do. But wait a second. I mean, really, there's a lot that goes into what happens when someone goes through a death in the family and then makes that decision to donate their brain the same way they would donate an organ. There's a lot that goes into that. So first of all, there needs to be an education of the community about why it's important and why we need brain tissue. Registrant stories need to be shared. We need to distribute information. We need to be giving webinars like I'm doing right now. We need to be present at autism events like walks and rides and other places. Generate partnerships with organizations like Autism Speaks and Autism Society of America, ATN. We also need to use the media to show everybody why this is an important resource, because generally, this always isn't the case, is that once a family's had a conversation about it and understands it, they do become willing to at least consider it in the future. But a lot of people don't even know about it. We do get quite a number of calls from places like medical examiners' offices just looking for a place for their, you know, child's brothers, sisters, parents' brain to be donated because they want to have that option and they don't know about it already. So a lot of it is making sure that the community at least knows that there's this option. And then, of course, you know, you're all aware of this. You sign up for something and you forget you sign up for it, and it just kind of goes out of your mind. And we don't want that. So the Autism BrainNet doesn't want you to just sign up and then walk away. We want you to understand that this is an important resource and that the science that comes out of this, that these studies do have an actual impact on the lives of people with autism. So there's an amount of communication that goes on with registrants, and I'll talk about that at the end. And then, of course, we answer questions and mainly keep the issue visible with families. And this is really why Autism Science Foundation is involved in this. So we're not a funding partner. What we do is we go out to the community. Right here, you can see Casey Gold in our office at the Westchester Walk a couple of years ago. Here's another event that we attended. Here I am actually at a Brain Awareness Week event, which is something that's hosted by the Dana Foundation and the Society for Neuroscience to get kids involved in brain research. And so clearly I wasn't there registering people for kids for the Autism BrainNet. I was there to explain the importance of studying the brain. We write regular articles for Ian. We're at multiple events. And then also, I'm sorry, this is not a great picture of her, but this is Jill Breach, and I don't know if any of you know her. She's an amazing advocate in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and works with Autism Speaks. She's really amazing, and she appeared on NBC News in the Dallas-Fort Worth area on a story that they did about the program. So really, the nodes do an incredibly important thing, but really it's our job to get the information out to the community community, so you guys at least know about it. Now, you know, what you do with that information is one thing, but you should know what's involved. And of course, Autism Speaks is a partner, and Safari kind of funds the whole thing. So what's the real purpose of using brain tissue? Why would we need actual brain tissue? And this is a schematic that I downloaded from the internet that looks at, you can see this is a person's brain. And then within that brain, there are literally hundreds and millions of neurons, which are brain cells that connect to each other. And these connections can go over short distances, or they can go over longer distances. And they communicate with each other, and they tell what they tell by communicating with each other, they're telling, you know, people to, they're directing breathing, they're directing, you know, motor movements, they're directing speech, they're directing all these things, again, over short and long distances. You can't really look at these particular tiny, tiny brain cells and the proteins on these brain cells, which are the targets of therapeutics, unless you look at the brain tissue. The imaging technology just has not gotten far enough for scientists to look, excuse me, beyond just like the structure. You need to look at things from really a cellular level. And why this is important is because if there's, and I'm sorry, there's over 100 billion neurons and there's 100 trillion connections, and you could see, here's the brain, and on the right-hand side, you could see how many, this is each individual brain cells, how many connections that they can make to each other. So they can make multiple connections to one particular neuron, or they can make connections to several different neurons in that same region, which then connect outward. And so it's really important, because autism is a disorder of, or a common, something that's caused by a change in the connectivity of different brain regions, that we understand more about those brain cells that make those connections. So this is a very, very simple schematic, just to give you an idea, which is kind of similar to this, but on more of a drawing, more of like kind of a simpler level. So this is the cell body, and this is where the impulses generate, and they're traveled along the axon, and then they're so the signals come from this way, go along this way, and then connect to other neurons on the spines and synapses of the next connecting neuron. So it's the synapse that seems to be so important, the area of the connection of where two neurons communicate to each other. And so this is important for treatment. So researchers are finding that, and I think there's a, yeah, that there's a animation, that it's this area right here at the synaptic junction, or the areas at which the neurons communicate. And by the way, this neuron can also be receiving information from another cell as well. That this is where the kind of the core of autism is, and really the targets of different pharmacological treatments. So you can scroll in, and it's really like at these tiny areas here that scientists are focusing on. So you can see now why it's really not feasible to use anything other than that brain tissue, right? Because that's going to give you the resolution of looking at the areas that are so important. So really, what has this research told us? So has Autism BrainNet tissue told scientists that have made, you know, any sort of impact on how individuals with autism are treated or understood or diagnosed? And so one of the things is here's a brain cell. Here is the dendrite here. So this is a microscopic image of this here. And on this, you can see that there's these little tiny spines. And in people with autism, there seem to be a lot of these little tiny spines, which connect to other areas. If you can imagine, each one of these little dots has the potential to connect to another neuron. I don't know if you can tell or not, this is somebody with autism, and look at all these little tiny spines. And then somebody without autism has them, and that's fine, but they don't have as many of them. And this suggests that people with autism, that may be a syndrome that they have too many connections, that they're that their brains are overstimulated in some ways because they have, because they have too many of these areas that they're called dendritic spines. There's just too many connections. The good news is that in an animal model, this is the animal model of autism, and you can look at these little spines, right? And there's a lot of them. And you'll have to trust me when I say there's more than in animal models without this particular mutation. But a drug, which has been used for other purposes and is still early stages to be used in autism, but it has shown that this drug, when it's administered, can reverse this. So instead of seeing all these different tiny these dendritic spines, you see the number that's seen in people without autism. And what's really more important is, at least in this animal model, it reverses some of the behavioral features as well. So that's one reason why this is so important, because you can look at different medications, you can look at different treatment therapies, you can look at different, different paradigms, which may change the way the brain is wired. You also see, this is kind of one of the older and more established findings in looking at the brain. These are called cortical mini columns. So if you look, go down to the bottom, this is somebody who isn't diagnosed with autism. And you can see that, now I would never be able to do this, but there are physicists who've been able to map out all of the different neurons in this area of the brain and determine that they fit into what are called cortical mini columns. And you can see this, these are the lines that they actually kind of fit and connect into mini columns where they go up and down in the brain, and this is how they connect to each other. And they have a general width, right? So you can see that they're about this far apart from each other. In autism, they're a lot wider. So, this is also affecting the connectivity of the brain. And this is actually a target of something called transmagnetic therapy. So there have been some autism advocates who have said that this has been effective. Some people have said that it's not, but it's literally putting an electrical magnet on certain areas of your brain and turning that magnet on. It is thought to affect this process here, these cortical mini columns. Because what happens is that if these columns are too far apart, these brain cells don't communicate to each other the same way that they would if the columns are closer together. And again, many physicists smarter than me have figured out that these are kind of organized into columns, and this is actually one of the more established findings in using brain tissue and studying autism. So I mentioned that autism, is kind of a condition of brain connectivity. And one of them, I'm just going to point out that one of the major ways we know this to be true is, one, by looking at electrical activity of people with autism and mapping out how it goes across different brain regions. Another is looking at fiber tracts in the brain using imaging techniques and looking at how they connect to each other. And then also looking at brain metabolism to determine how changes in activity in one area control changes in activity in the other area. But another very, very important part of scientists understanding how the autism brain is connected is through brain tissue, which looks at the size of neurons, the length of neurons, and the number of ways that they connect to each other. And so some of our basic understandings about autism have been solved through or understood through looking at the brain. So it also explains that I'm going to go through next a few key questions, right? So these are questions that I get a lot. I'm sure Autism Speaks gets them a lot, that have been partially answered. None of these questions are so simple as it's only answered by brain tissue and that's it. But in fact, brain tissue does play a huge role in helping to answer some of these questions. And the first one is, why are girls less likely to be diagnosed? So this is a question that is multifactorial. It's not one thing. Obviously, there are concerns about how diagnostic criteria are applied. There's concerns about how girls with autism are perceived in society. But also what we see in the brain is that there are more autism dysregulated genes in females. So females have more dysregulated autism genes than males do. And so that kind of goes counterintuitive to what you would think, right? You'd say, well, if girls are less likely to be diagnosed, they would have fewer, dysregulated genes in the brain. This points to the fact that there may be something in girls, a factor, a genetic factor, some sort of hormonal factor we don't know, that protects them against an autism diagnosis. Girls with autism tend to have a higher genetic load, but yet they're diagnosed less often. So there may be a protective factor involved. And so that's one potential reason that's now supported by science why girls are less likely to be diagnosed with autism. The other one is, why won't my child sleep? And again, this one is very multifactorial and is not explained solely by one particular brain area. I know that the ATN is incredibly interested in this question. And in fact, an ATN researcher, Beth Mallow, was the first one to publish a study where they looked at melatonin, which is I think it's a hormone or a chemical in the brain that's produced in an area called the pineal gland. Different things happen. When melatonin is turned on, it signals the sleeping cycle. When it's light outside and you're supposed to be awake, it's kind of triggered by the environment. Melatonin levels decrease. And it affects serotonin. But the important thing here is that melatonin levels do affect sleep, and that's what Dr. Mallow found, is that treating kids with melatonin did in fact improve, not completely eliminate, but did improve some of their sleeping issues. In the autism brain, the red is the people with autism, and this is the level of melatonin in their brain. And the green is are the people without autism. And you can see and these were taken from the pineal glands of people with autism, and without autism. Of course, there's going to be variability based on, when they passed away, but people with autism do have lower melatonin levels. So this helps kind of understand why melatonin would work, and potentially add to the literature about different therapies that can help people with autism. Another question that I've been getting a lot lately is, why is my teenager with autism anxious and emotional? And of course, this is a very complex question. There's a lot of different areas of the brain that control anxiety and emotion. One of them is called the amygdala, and it's located right behind your ear. There's two of them, and they're located right behind your ear, in your kind of deep down in your brain. And this is one of the areas that's really very involved in anxiety. It's involved in fear-related behaviors, not necessarily a little bit of social anxiety, but more social fear, and also anxiety in different situations. Now, anxiety is pretty normal, right? Like, you actually should be anxious if a rattlesnake, comes right up in front of you, or you should be anxious if a car is veering right at you. So it has a normal evolutionary process. And in normal development, if you look at NT, which is the blue, the total number of neurons in the amygdala, which is this area that's important for anxiety and emotional regulation, it goes up. And that's, that's just, the way things are. Teenagers think that they know everything, but in fact, their brains really still haven't completely formed until you're in your mid-30s. However, in people with autism, the number of neurons goes down. So there's this crossover somewhere in teenagers, where typically developing teenagers are getting more neurons in the amygdala, but teenagers with autism are getting less neurons in the amygdala. And we're hearing a lot about how teenage years, and also, I'm not ignoring that puberty is an issue here, and hormonal changes are involved, but we're hearing a lot about the issues that teenagers especially around anxiety and emotional regulation. Not that toddlers and children don't have them, but they seem to be augmented, and this could be one of the reasons why. A lot of things change across the lifespan, and we get a lot of questions about, well, what happens as my brain gets older? What happens? What should I expect of my child as they turn into an adult? Will their brain stay the same or will it change? And in fact, a comprehensive study done in a bunch of different brain regions shows at first the cell size is decreased in people with autism, and then in adolescence it starts to recover, and in adulthood it recovers so quickly, it recovers so drastically that the cell size actually gets bigger. So there seems to be something going on where there may be like a rebound effect of cell size throughout life. This could definitely affect changes seen across the lifespan, especially cognitive and motor changes that people with autism experience. And so it may actually help individuals prepare for some of the lifetime changes that occur. So, so I'm telling you and bragging on and on and on about the Autism BrainNet and why it's so important. But we have about 5,000 registrants. If this is such an important program, why aren't more people, or why isn't everyone registered? Well, we actually did some focus groups about this, and one of the things was some people never heard about it before. Another thing was that people, when they normally hear about programs like this, in terms of something that happens after somebody dies, they're identified with that donor family, right? So it's usually the donor family that's talking about what this person meant to them and how sad they were that the person was gone. And that kind of puts people in a situation where they think like, I don't want to identify with that person. I don't want to be identified as a grieving next of kin. I am a person who, I'm a parent, I'm a person, I'm a relative, I'm a friend who wants to help research and learn more, but that doesn't necessarily mean I want to imagine the day when someone in my life dies and I need to make this decision. So what we've done, and I couldn't embed this, I hope I can. Okay, so this is a video, I don't know if you can hear it, and I'll skip ahead a little bit. So this is the Matthews family.
Three amazing sons. My son Mark is 22. He is a firefighter and an EMT. My middle son Timmy, we call him the game filling of the Oreo sandwich with boys, has a heart of gold. He's 16. And Casey is our son with autism. He's 14 years old.
Casey's just sweet. He can't talk, but he says so much with his expression. Look at you, something's wrong.
He's changed me, I believe, into be a better person and a better mother, and I think even a better human being.
They've always been inclusive with Casey. They were just all part of it.
They're really good boys. They really are.
Some of the challenges my family and I have had to face because of autism aren't just living a normal life.
It breaks our heart, and it only kind of hyper focuses in on the fact that we're the only ones that we know living this, and we have no help, we have no support, we have no respite.
Autism has changed what we were. We've become very, homebodies. It's not so easy just to go out to a restaurant all the time.
I think, unfortunately, our pain makes people uncomfortable.
So we don't have to listen to this whole thing, but the Matthews are pretty relatable, right? So, they may not be representative of every family experiencing autism. Casey is living in a residential facility right now. He's pretty severely affected, but the story is pretty relatable. I mean, everyone with autism has felt, every family has felt a little bit disengaged or ostracized or misunderstood at a particular time. And so we created a campaign called It Takes Brains. So the idea is that it takes brains to help understand autism, and we can't do it alone. And so the families that have registered with the tissue program, and this is the Your City family, which anyone associated with Autism Speaks is very familiar with Judith Your City and her family. She's chosen to register, and not only register, but put herself out there as a registrant. And they're superheroes. They're superheroes because they're making this decision that nobody really wants to make, and they're making, making the commitment to learn more about the program. And here's Alex Plank. I don't know if any of you know Alex Plank. He is a fierce self-advocate. He has his own website called wrongplanet.net. And he has also decided that he has made the commitment to keep an open mind about brain tissue donation when the time comes. So instead of putting people having the next of kin, which we certainly do, who are, you know, at a point when they're grieving and they're sad, and having people relate to that image, we decided it was better to talk to the people who are registered, right? Because that's most people. I mean, if you think about 250 brains versus the millions of people who have a diagnosis in their family, it's probably, you know, more relatable to think of yourself as a registrant rather than next of kin. So we have these outreach materials. Judith says, and they're targeted. I forgot to mention we have an ambassador family for each one of the nodes. So Judith lives in Boston. She's an ambassador for the Boston node. The Matthews are an ambassador for the New York node. We have ambassadors for the Texas. You saw Jill Breach and the California node. And we go to different events and we talk about the program with families and we ask them to register. And what does registration mean? Well, I think this is where people get stuck. When you register with when you register to donate your organs, you sign the back of a driver's license. And in fact, it's a proxy consent. This is not that at all. It is not binding. People think, and I totally understand why, that once we have you in our system, we're tracking what you do, whether you've passed away, whether your loved ones are passed away, that we're going to harass you, that we're going to come after you. There's not that many people involved. I mean, to be completely honest, that we have the capacity to do that. What this program does is continue to keep people engaged as this is an option. So if that option does happen, or if something does happen and someone wants to take advantage of brain donation, they know who to call. They understand why it's important. They understand that it's a program that is trusted by multiple respected organizations. And again, nobody's going to chase after you. We don't send anything other than materials about the BrainNet to you. And those materials are, we have a Facebook page, we have a Twitter account, we have regular webinars about when new findings come out that have a clear clinical implication for the community. We invite the person who's led that study to give a short 20-minute talk, and then anybody can ask whatever question they want afterwards. We also have a quarterly newsletter where we talk about what presentations have been made. We spotlight the scientists. So the scientists that are actually in the trenches studying the brain, we want people to feel like that the tissue that you donate is entrusted to these very smart, very capable, and very hardworking people, which it is. And so when you register with the BrainNet, you're only registering kind of for more information. There's no legally binding anything. You will get quarterly communications from Autism, from the Autism BrainNet. So again, if you haven't done it already, this is a great opportunity for you guys to sign up. To fill out just, your name. You don't even have to fill out your address, but your email address and, how you heard about us would be great. And you will get, the regular newsletters. You will get a newsletter. I think it'll come out in July. If we have another webinar opportunity, you'll be notified about it. If there's, if you want to become more involved in spreading the word, we would be happy to hear from you. So it's really kind of you indicating that you're interested in receiving more information about the program. So I'm going to end it there. I hope we have tons of questions. I wanted to leave time to answer them. It could be about anything having to do with the Autism BrainNet, about the science, about the program. It can really be whatever floats your boat, whatever you're interested in hearing about.
Great. Thank you so much, Alycia. That was really, it was really great to learn about the program and all the awesome work you're doing. We did get a few questions. So one of them is pretty technical. I'll do my best to relay it in a way that makes sense. So the question is, in regards to the dendritic spines, does it appear that those with ASD produce more intrinsically, or is it that the pruning mechanisms are not as effective as those in neurotypical people?
That's a really great question. And actually, it seems to be both, right? So it starts very early on, and the scientists can look not just at the number of these dendritic spines, right? But then in those same brains, that's the other thing, is that you can take 30, you can use 30 brains from up to one for each, sorry. So each brain can supply resources for 30 different studies. So someone can do that experiment by looking not only at the dendritic spines themselves, but the proteins that are expressed in those dendritic spines across development. And so that's a great question, and the answer seems to be both. Both it's developmental, and also it's something's going on with improper pruning later on in life. So I tried to answer that simply, but if anybody, and I should have put this on, I wonder if I can put on my email address. If anyone has any questions, they're welcome, please, to email me. I'm going to make a new slide here. Uh-oh, file. Hold on, insert. Okay, here we go. So if anyone has a question, I hope you guys can all see that. That's my email address, Halladay@autismsciencefoundation.org. And please email me if you have any questions, or didn't answer them, didn't ask them, or they come to you after this is over. Were there any other questions, Megan?
Can you hear me, Alycia?
Oh, now I can hear you, yes.
Actually, it looks like Megan may have lost audio. I think she's working on it, but I can ask you the question I was asking.
Okay.
I was wondering on the study where you looked at the control groups versus ASD in the neurons in the amygdala, have there been additional research looking at those two groups as compared to individuals diagnosed with anxiety?
Not yet. So that's actually the next step. Believe it or not, it's almost kind of like they're really, so anxiety actually gets lumped into there is no dedicated brain bank for anxiety to my knowledge. So finding those particular brains would be difficult, and that's why it's so important for there to be an autism BrainNet instead of dedicated brain banks, so that this research can happen. But that's absolutely I think a next step, because it is kind of theoretical, right? Like the amygdala is involved in anxiety using imaging techniques, right, in people with anxiety, and anxiety provoking situations do trigger amygdala activity using imaging. But I don't think anyone's looked at the neurons of people with anxiety versus autism and how they change over time. That amygdala study took like 2 decades to complete. So
let me just let them know that, okay. Let Megan know that we are hearing you. Well, thank you, Alycia. This has really been helpful. Megan says there aren't additional questions. If someone has a question, since Megan has lost audio, just go ahead and type it in the chat box, and we'll try to get to it. Otherwise, we'll give you a little time back. And Alycia, I just want to thank you again for taking time to share this really important information. And perhaps at some point, or now, if you want to take a moment of even thinking if there are things that we could do to help. I appreciate that you included your email address, that folks may be willing to try to reach out or try to help or support the effort. So if there's anything else you can think of, let us know, and we can relay that on as well.
So yeah, I just want to mention that we want this program to be presented to the community in a non-threatening way. You know, we don't want people to feel like we're trying to jinx them in any way, or that people are feeling like this is rammed down their throats. If there are places that you feel like this information would be appreciated, I am happy to send packets. So I could send like a plexiglass container with some registration cards and some brochures to wherever, right? Because people hear about this program, you know, from you know, outreach events, from clinicians, their own clinicians, from other patient support groups, from, you know, just the internet, from events like this. And so we totally are open to having that material out in a place that you know, and every situation is different, a place that's appropriate, a place that people feel comfortable with. And people can, you know, if you think that that's an option, just let me know and I will gladly send you materials.
No, that's great. And I wanted to give a shout out actually to many of our family advisory committee folks who have worked with you, I think, in training on being able to talk families to family about this. So if there are ATN sites listening today, we have had some discussion through our family advisory committee with Alycia, and many of our folks are prepared to do a parent-to-parent discussion around this. Well, Alycia, I want to thank you again for taking time again to share this really important information with us. And so I encourage everyone who's listening, if you have additional questions or would like additional information, Alycia has included her email on the last slide, to please feel free to reach out to Alycia directly. So Alycia, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you all for hanging on to the webinar too. Thank you so much. I look forward to speaking with some of you soon.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.